Yeah, I really like this purple oxalis and some of the other things, and Queensland's personal lace, false dandelion, plantain. Got a little sundew in there, but it seems to be alright. Tried a cutting from a tomato plant. Okay. Yeah, what I want to show you today, if I can, if I've still got the sunlight. It's supposed to be a sunny day. I was supposed to go out to the Yonk today, but no, bullshit. Just keep telling this bullshit. I don't know if we can see this. I want to show you, you know, that it should be dark under here. If I pull it up, see that? What I want to show you though is so the iron is in the sulfidic state there. So it's, in a way, I suppose, in air quotes, you can say that, you know, if I pull this away, it's very sulfidic, very close to the surface. So it's only oxidizing on the very surface, fractions of a, you know, barely a millimetre sort of thing. So if the iron isn't rusting, isn't pulling in the oxygen to form the iron oxide, the rust, so it must be staying. Well, do you say that it's anaerobic? You see, because my argument is, because they always talk about this thing that CPs need an acidic, well-drained soil that should never dry out. You see, I think this is the reason why it should never. I think this is the reason why it should never dry out. Because if it dries out, you're not going to have this. You're not going to have that. Just millimetres from the surface of the soil sort of thing. So as long as that doesn't dry out, so we've got minerals over organics. I think the organics there is to make sure that it stays damp and never dries out sort of thing, basically. Well, during the growing season anyway, so. And that very thin layer surface will oxidise up. It takes about 4 hours for it to do this sort of thing. And yeah. So it's not fast, but it's not really slow either. So yeah, and of course, as you did, we learned that it's the same for this one as well. I showed you that one the other day, sort of thing. So I set up a big pot of it, sort of thing. So their idea that it should never dry out, I think, is to maintain this this ability for the iron not to, in quotes, oxidise up or rust, become rust. So the question is, if it's not rusting, it's not pulling in oxygen, is it anaerobic, you see? So my suggestion to you is, if it's not pulling in oxygen, that 20%, it's not reacting with that 20% oxygen in the atmosphere, then the rest of the pot, when they talk about being well drained, what they really mean is, when it's well drained, you've got, in quotes, air pockets in there, voids where the air, under air pressure, can get in there and, you know, force its way in. Because, you know, with air pressure you can crush, you can break you know, big voids and things like that. You can crush in big containers just with the air pressure. It's that strong. So you do know that if there's any voids down there, air's going to be forced into it, but just by atmospheric pressure. There's no way. And this idea that you're using perlite as an aeration medium, I don't think that's the way it works. I think the perlite is actually making it wetter. It pulls in water into the interstices and holds it there, and thereby making it wet so it doesn't dry out, maintaining this ability for the iron not to rust. Therefore, if the iron doesn't rust, the air, the 20% oxygen in the air is not used up and can get to the nether regions of the pot and get to the roots of the plant, because they all say that, you know, roots of plant need oxygen, and roots of plants are achlorophyllous, they don't have chloroplasts in them, or the chloroplasts are not functional or not green sort of thing. So you might want to look into more detail about that, about roots and chloroplasts, and the fact that chloroplasts apparently are, you know, sort of ancient cyanophyta, basically from the distant past when we had an anaerobic earth, and they got incorporated into organisms and so on, and so that's the development of green plant life, the plant kingdom sort of thing on a way. And we also had another one that got in there and became the mitochondrion. So we got chloroplasts and mitochondria, and in very ancient past, and they have different genome sequences in them that you can tell them that they're from different organisms and blah blah blah, and what they were likely evolved from, etc, etc. You can look all this up online. So the question is, but we know for our CPs they have quite colourful roots for example with things like capensis. So from the 1970s you used to get really long, thick, colourful roots. It could be like an orange colour, a red colour, a magenta pink sort of colour to them, with some pubescence on them, you know, sort of hairs on the outside, but none of the really strong crimson red root hairs you can occasionally see. And of course they eventually become the fawn tan colour root hairs. So as in that Dioneer paper from many moons ago from the 1950s, they talked about long persistent root hairs. So this was a couple of so-called ecologists and a botanist sort of thing talking about long persistent root hairs. So they'd obviously come from botanical classes, you know, and if you've ever done those sort of things, they usually start you off with peas and beans, and they have very long root hairs on them. So for them to actually point out that Dioneer had long persistent root hairs in the wild from plants they extracted and looked at in the wild, that's very unusual. See, most people just would have just glanced over that sort of statement and thought, okay. But no, for botanists to actually say this is that they have long persistent root hairs in the wild, that means they must be of the size of a pea or bean or greater, which is very unusual. So it's very strange. Anyway, but they didn't say what colour they were, you see, I don't think, if I can remember rightly. So our surmise that they started off really crimson red and eventually become that fawn tan colour over time, a bit like an ericoid root hair in a way. So following a lineage in a way from so-called Moorish heaths. What I think they're saying when they're saying Moorish heaths, I think they mean black. I think that's what they're saying. They're saying they're Moorish heaths, but they don't say this to you. I think they're Moorish heaths because underneath it's a sort of this green, blue, black sort of look to it that's maintained, at least during the weather parts of the year, or the growing season of CPs or carnivorous and CP related plants and weeds and things like that. So yeah, so anyway, I think this is what they're talking about when they say you need a well-drained soil that never dries, a bit like ferns. They always say with ferns, leaf mould is an essential requirement for growing ferns, and you should never let ferns dry out. Perhaps they all sit in the same sort of category. And you know, they're trying to sell you this expensive perlite, you know, it's a lot like expensive sand basically, right? But they're not really explaining how it works. I don't think it's there for aeration. I think it's there to maintain the wetness, but in a well-drained state. So it's like a well-drained, you know, like a sponge in a way. It's acting like a sponge. So it never dries out. But it's not that it's aerated from that sense. It's aerated from the sense that the iron does not rust. Therefore, it doesn't take the 20% oxygen out of the atmosphere. Therefore, the air that goes into the nether regions of the pot, of a well-drained pot, in other words, there's lots of interstices there, there's lots of void spaces in the pot for the atmospheric pressure to push its way into the nether region of the pot if it's well drained, because water is an incompressible fluid, basically, or liquid. You can break cast iron balls by freezing water. It's an incompressible liquid, basically. So the air pressure can't push that out because it's incompressible. But if it's well drained, it can easily get into the nether regions of the pot, sort of thing, if you understand me that way. And of course, if the iron is not rusting, therefore that 20% oxygen that's in the atmosphere will not be consumed, evidently. Anyway, I just thought I'd make this little, I don't even want to call it a rant, but they never explain these terms, and I think we now actually have some physical, I wouldn't call it a proof, because we're dealing with biology, and the only science that you can prove things in is mathematics. We got a marked shell, basically. You go to Hamburg and you've got a marked shell. Here we go, we've got some I'm showing you it to be so, sort of thing. There you go, I'm showing you it to be so, sort of thing. And you can even see that it's starting to oxidize up. Even as we've been talking, it's starting to go back. It's changing from that color. And I can come back tomorrow, and I might do that tomorrow. Come back and show you that even though it's re-oxidized back up under that surface, just fractions of a millimeter down, as long as it stays damp and well drained, it's going to stay. The iron is going to stay in quote anaerobic form, but it's not going to prevent the rest of the pot from being aerated. Common misconception, I don't know, but as I said, you can actually work this out, from logic, basically, deduction. You can deduce this, basically, what's going on. Anyway, there's oxygen about because it's re-oxidizing, you see, taking some of that 20% oxygen in the atmosphere out of the atmosphere to re-oxidize up. So yeah. But once it's fully oxidized, it can't take any more oxygen out of the thing. And we know that underneath, it's not oxidizing, so it cannot be doing that. Therefore, we can only surmise, if we've got a well-drained soil, that the nether regions of the pot are being aerated to some extent. Okay, well, I think that's about it for now. I don't think I'll do much more, but we'll see. Anyway, I think this pot is now nicely drained here. I do like my plantains. I think they're a good analogue model for cephalotus, especially with the way they look like monocots, but apparently they're supposed to be dicots, even though they have characteristics of a monocot. And the flower stalks are the inflorescences are reduced from a ecological point of view. Like an ancient form, sort of thing, a bit like cephalotus, out in its own order, all on its own, sort of thing. The other thing is I like I think the Queen's Anne's lace or purse is a good analogue model for Dioneer. Apparently, strange, isn't it? I would say that, something like that. But anyway, we'll see how we go, and I think that's enough for today. And this one, and we'll keep testing these things over time. Okay, over and out. See ya.